Right now, somewhere in America, police patrols have quietly increased. Surveillance units are watching more closely. Federal agencies are monitoring chatter that most of us will never see. And the reason is simple. Officials believe retaliation could be coming, not a missile streaking across the sky, not fighter jets overhead, something far less predictable and potentially far harder to stop. After recent strikes against Iran and the reported death of its supreme leader, threats have escalated. Warnings have intensified, and major U.S. cities have been placed on heightened alert. The question isn't whether tensions are high, they clearly are. The question is what that actually means for you, for your city, for everyday life across the country. Are we talking about cyber disruptions, lone actors, coordinated attacks, or is this a moment of precaution that sounds more frightening than the reality behind it? In the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly what officials are saying, what experts believe is realistic, which cities are increasing security, and most importantly, what Americans truly need to understand right now, without panic, without exaggeration, and without political noise. Hi, I'm Sophia. If you're new here, I focus on breaking down fast-moving national security stories in a way that's clear, calm, and grounded in what we actually know, not just what's trending. There's a lot of emotion surrounding this situation, and understandably so. Words like retaliation and high alert immediately trigger fear, especially when they're tied to major U.S. cities. But here's what matters: separating possibility from probability. In this video, we're going to walk step by step through what triggered this escalation, why experts say a direct missile strike isn't the concern, what kind of threat federal agencies are actually preparing for, and what practical awareness, not panic, should look like right now. Because once you understand the type of threat officials are focused on, the entire picture starts to look very different. To understand why cities are now on heightened alert, we have to start with what triggered this escalation in the first place. The United States, alongside Israel, carried out strikes targeting Iran. And reports indicate that Iran's supreme leader, a figure who had been in power for decades, was killed. For Iran, that isn't just a military loss. That's political, symbolic, and deeply personal for many inside the country. When a leader who has shaped a nation's identity for 40 years is suddenly gone, the reaction is rarely quiet. Almost immediately, Iranian officials signaled retaliation. President Trump publicly warned Iran not to respond, making it clear that any counterattack would be met with force. So now you have a volatile equation: a major strike, confirmed casualties, public warnings from both sides, and global attention locked onto what happens next. That kind of environment naturally puts intelligence agencies on edge. But here's where this becomes more nuanced than most headlines suggest. When people hear the word retaliation, they often picture conventional warfare, missiles crossing oceans, dramatic military exchanges, large-scale battlefield scenarios. That's not what experts believe is likely here. In fact, multiple defense analysts have stated very clearly that a missile launched directly from Iran toward the U.S. mainland is extremely unlikely. The geographic distance alone makes that complicated. And more importantly, the United States has layered missile defense systems designed specifically to intercept long-range threats. Between early detection satellites, naval defense systems, and ground-based interceptors, a direct ballistic strike is not the realistic concern dominating security briefings right now. That's important because fear tends to fill in blanks with worst-case imagery. But national security strategy doesn't operate on dramatic movie scenarios. It operates on probability. And the probability of a missile flying from Iran into a U.S. city undetected is extraordinarily low. Officials are not losing sleep over that scenario. What they are focused on is something far less visible and far more difficult to predict, because modern retaliation doesn't always look like tanks and rockets. It often looks asymmetric, indirect, dispersed, and sometimes carried out by individuals rather than uniformed militaries. That shift from conventional warfare to asymmetric threat is the part most people don't immediately see. And it's the reason the conversation inside federal agencies sounds very different from what social media speculation suggests. The battlefield, if there is one, would not likely be in the sky. It would be far more subtle than that. And that's exactly why officials are emphasizing vigilance at the local level instead of warning about incoming missiles. So, if the concern isn't a missile strike, what exactly are federal agencies preparing for? According to briefings and statements coming out of the FBI and the Pentagon, the primary worry centers around what's known as asymmetric retaliation, specifically the possibility of a lone wolf or sleeper cell style attack inside the United States. Now, let's pause there because those terms get used often and they can sound dramatic. A lone wolf attack typically refers to an individual who acts independently without direct operational control from a foreign government, but who may be ideologically motivated or inspired by broader geopolitical events. A sleeper cell, on the other hand, would involve individuals who have been embedded quietly for a period of time and activate when tensions escalate. Both scenarios are difficult to detect because they don't necessarily involve large-scale troop movements or obvious signals, and that's what makes this category of threat so complicated. It doesn't require advanced missile systems. It doesn't require airspace violations. It doesn't require a formal declaration of war. It could be as small as a homemade explosive device. It could involve a vehicle used as a weapon. It could involve a single armed individual targeting a crowded area. None of those scenarios are confirmed, none are announced, and there's no public intelligence indicating a specific plan. But officials are preparing for the possibility because historically, when geopolitical tensions spike, the risk of isolated retaliatory acts can increase. Now, here's where uncertainty plays a powerful role. Some analysts suggest that if something were to happen, it could happen quickly, days, not months, especially if an individual actor is already radicalized and doesn't require coordination. Others argue that any meaningful operation would take time, planning, communication, and logistics, which would stretch the timeline into weeks. Intelligence agencies rarely give exact dates, and that ambiguity alone can amplify public anxiety. When officials say stay vigilant, it doesn't mean something is imminent tomorrow morning. It means the probability curve has shifted enough to justify heightened awareness. And timing matters for another reason. A sophisticated attack, even a small one, often aims for maximum psychological impact. That means crowded environments, symbolic locations, or peak activity periods. But again, it's important to distinguish between elevated alert status and confirmed threat. Right now, cities are in prevention mode, not response mode. There's a difference. Prevention mode means more patrols, more monitoring, more intelligence sharing. It does not mean an attack is scheduled or guaranteed. The reality is this: most heightened alerts do not end in catastrophe. They end quietly with nothing happening because increased vigilance works as a deterrent, and that's something rarely emphasized in dramatic headlines. Still, the reason multiple major metropolitan areas are now increasing security presence isn't random. There's a pattern to which cities are being prioritized, and understanding that pattern helps bring clarity to what's happening next. So, which cities are actually on high alert right now? According to federal guidance and local law enforcement briefings, the focus is on major metropolitan hubs, places like New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Miami. That list isn't random. These cities represent dense populations, financial centers, transportation hubs, political landmarks, and in some cases, symbolic targets with global visibility. When security agencies prioritize resources, they start where impact would be greatest, not because something specific is scheduled to happen there, but because those locations naturally carry higher strategic value. What does high alert actually mean on the ground? It means increased patrols in high-threat areas. It means more visible police presence near infrastructure like transit stations, bridges, airports, and public gathering spaces. It means intelligence units coordinating more closely with federal agencies and monitoring for unusual activity. In some cases, departments may temporarily adjust staffing to ensure faster response times. But here's the key point. Heightened alert is a precautionary posture. It is not evidence of a confirmed attack plot. Law enforcement often scales visibility up during geopolitical flashpoints as both a deterrent and a reassurance measure. And that distinction matters because when people hear that their city is on high alert, the imagination tends to run ahead of the facts. High alert is about readiness. It's about closing gaps before they're tested. Historically, increased visibility alone has prevented incidents by discouraging would-be attackers who rely on surprise and vulnerability. So, while the language sounds dramatic, the mechanics behind it are methodical and controlled. Now, if you found this breakdown helpful so far, this is a good time to make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss updates as this situation develops. My goal is to keep you informed with clarity, not noise as new information comes in. But there's another layer to this story that may be even more relevant to everyday Americans. And it doesn't involve physical patrols at all. It involves something most of us interact with every single day: digital infrastructure. Cybersecurity experts have been quietly emphasizing that if retaliation were to occur, the digital domain could be a primary arena. And that's not speculation pulled from thin air. We've seen in recent years how even temporary disruptions to major platforms, whether it was cloud services going down, trading systems lagging, email networks freezing, or widespread software outages, can affect millions of people within minutes. Think about how dependent daily life is on interconnected systems. Banks rely on digital networks. Airlines rely on digital scheduling platforms. Hospitals use digital records. Schools run on online communication tools. Even short disruptions ripple outward quickly. That's what makes cyber operations attractive in asymmetric conflicts. They can create confusion and economic disruption without firing a single shot. They can frustrate, delay, and destabilize without crossing the threshold into full military escalation. Now, it's important to emphasize there is no confirmed cyber attack currently disrupting U.S. infrastructure tied to this situation. But cybersecurity analysts consistently warn that this domain remains a realistic pressure point during periods of international tension. And interestingly, experts often note that timing in cyber operations is strategic. If someone were aiming to cause maximum disruption, they wouldn't choose a quiet weekend when offices are closed and trading floors are empty. They would likely choose a weekday when markets are active, schools are in session, and travel is peaking because the ripple effects would multiply. That doesn't mean something is scheduled for Wednesday at noon. It means disruption strategy, if used, tends to aim for peak dependency windows, and understanding that helps frame expectations properly. A cyber disruption, while frustrating and potentially costly, is not the same as a mass casualty attack. It's disruptive, not necessarily deadly, and in many ways it's designed more for psychological and economic impact than physical harm. So as we move forward, the focus isn't just on streets and skylines. It's also on servers, networks, and digital gateways that quietly power modern life. And that broader battlefield, both physical and digital, is where this situation becomes more complex than a single headline can capture. If cyber retaliation were to happen, experts consistently point to one key factor: disruption timing. Not because anyone has circled a specific date on a calendar, but because strategic impact depends on when systems are most relied upon. Middle of the week, markets open, schools operating at full capacity, corporate networks active, travel schedules dense. That's when even a short outage can cascade across sectors. Flights get delayed, financial transactions stall, communication platforms freeze. And while none of that automatically translates into physical harm, it can generate confusion fast. And confusion in moments of geopolitical tension spreads anxiety even faster than facts. We've seen versions of this before. Cloud services go down and millions can't access email. Trading platforms lag and investors panic. Software updates malfunction and airports slow to a crawl. Those weren't acts of war, but they demonstrate just how interconnected daily life has become. That interconnectedness is both a strength and a vulnerability. So when cybersecurity officials talk about preparedness, they're not predicting catastrophe. They're acknowledging reality. A digital shockwave can travel nationwide in seconds. The good news is that agencies and private sector infrastructure teams are well aware of that risk, and cyber defense has become one of the most heavily funded areas of national security over the last decade. Redundancies exist, backup systems exist, rapid response protocols exist, but no system is invulnerable. And that's why awareness matters. At the same time, events unfolding overseas add another layer to the tension. In parts of the Middle East, protests have erupted near U.S. embassies. Demonstrators angry over recent strikes have gathered and in some cases attempted to damage property. Those scenes, people shouting, windows struck, security barriers reinforced, create powerful imagery. But it's important to separate symbolic unrest abroad from imminent threat at home. Protests outside embassies, while concerning, are not the same as coordinated domestic operations. They signal heightened emotions. They signal geopolitical strain. They do not automatically signal an organized attack on American soil. Still, from an intelligence standpoint, moments like this are when agencies widen their lens. They monitor communications more closely. They assess chatter. They look for patterns that could indicate inspiration or coordination. And that brings us back to the core challenge. Asymmetric threats don't always move in predictable ways. They can be influenced by events overseas, amplified by rhetoric, or accelerated by misinformation online. And in today's environment, misinformation itself can function almost like a force multiplier, spreading fear, distorting facts, and convincing people that something catastrophic is happening even when there's no verified evidence of it. That's why measured analysis is critical right now, because the space between possibility and probability is where most public anxiety lives, and understanding that gap is what allows you to stay informed without being overwhelmed. Adding to the seriousness of this moment are confirmed reports that 3 U.S. service members have been killed amid the escalating conflict. Whenever American personnel are lost, the strategic calculus shifts. It's no longer just about warnings and rhetoric. It becomes about response, deterrence, and demonstrating resolve. Historically, when U.S. forces suffer casualties tied to geopolitical adversaries, some form of counteraction follows. That doesn't always mean large-scale escalation, but it does mean the pressure increases. And pressure in international standoffs can create a cycle: action, response, counter-response. Each side signaling strength, each side attempting to avoid appearing weak. That cycle is delicate, and in delicate cycles, miscalculations become one of the biggest risks. This is where deterrence theory comes into play, the idea that by projecting overwhelming capability, you discourage further aggression. President Trump has made public statements indicating that no additional threats against the United States will be tolerated and that any further aggression would be met decisively. From a strategic standpoint, that messaging is intended to prevent escalation, not provoke it. The goal of strong language in moments like this is often to draw a line so clearly that the other side hesitates before crossing it. But deterrence only works if both sides believe escalation would carry unacceptable consequences. And belief in geopolitics can sometimes be influenced by emotion as much as calculation. While that larger strategic chess match unfolds at the federal level, local law enforcement faces a very different challenge, one rooted in practicality. Police departments in major cities can increase patrols. They can coordinate with federal task forces. They can monitor public spaces more closely. But preventing every possible lone actor scenario is extraordinarily difficult. By definition, lone wolf incidents often involve minimal communication beforehand. There may be no large network to intercept, no obvious financial trail, no formal command structure. That's why public awareness campaigns use phrases like, "If you see something, say something." It's not a slogan built on paranoia. It's built on the reality that community-level observation can sometimes identify what algorithms and surveillance miss. At the same time, law enforcement must balance vigilance with civil liberties. Acting on suspicion without cause carries its own risks, especially in a country that values constitutional protections. Overreaction can create tension. Underreaction can create vulnerability. Finding that balance is one of the most difficult aspects of domestic security, And that's another reason why heightened alert doesn't automatically translate to visible crisis. Much of the work happens quietly. Intelligence sharing, background monitoring, coordination between agencies, activities the public rarely sees. The truth is, even in high alert periods, most days pass without incident. Preparedness is about narrowing windows of opportunity, not predicting exact outcomes. And understanding the limitations and strengths of law enforcement helps ground expectations in reality rather than extremes. So what should Americans actually do in a moment like this? That's the question underneath all of it. Not the geopolitical chess match, not the headlines, not the social media speculation, just the practical everyday question. What does this mean for me and my family? The honest answer is this: awareness, not anxiety. Elevated alert does not mean immediate danger. It means agencies are watching more closely. And while you can't control global tensions, you can control how you respond to them. Stay informed through credible sources. Avoid amplifying unverified claims that spread faster than facts. If you're in a major metropolitan area, simply be mindful of your surroundings the same way you would during any large public event. That's not living in fear. That's situational awareness. When it comes to cyber concerns, basic digital hygiene goes a long way. Keep devices updated. Use strong authentication where possible. Be cautious with suspicious links or messages, especially during periods of high-profile international conflict, when phishing attempts tend to spike. Most cyber disruptions, if they occur, would likely be temporary and inconvenient rather than catastrophic. Preparing for that looks more like having backup communication methods and a bit of patience than stocking up for doomsday. The key is proportional response. Calm preparation beats reactive panic every single time. And if this kind of clear, steady breakdown is helpful to you, take a second to like the video so it reaches more people who want facts instead of fear-driven noise. Now, zooming back out to the larger strategic picture, public messaging from leadership plays a powerful role in moments like this. President Trump's stance has been direct, signaling that any further threats will be met with decisive action and that long-standing tensions with Iran will not continue unchecked. That messaging serves two purposes. Domestically, it reassures Americans that the government intends to project strength and protect national interests. Internationally, it functions as a warning designed to deter additional retaliation. But here's where it becomes complex. Strong rhetoric can stabilize a situation if it prevents miscalculation, or it can intensify it if the other side interprets it as escalation. Iran's leadership facing internal unrest and international scrutiny also has incentives to project strength. When a long-standing supreme leader is killed, domestic pressure can build rapidly. Governments in that position often feel compelled to respond in some visible way to maintain legitimacy. That response doesn't always take the form people expect. It could be symbolic, it could be cyber, it could be rhetorical, or it could be restrained depending on internal calculations we don't fully see. And that uncertainty, the internal decision-making happening behind closed doors, is the variable no intelligence agency can predict with absolute precision. That's why analysts focus less on dramatic scenarios and more on probabilities. What actions would achieve a response without triggering overwhelming counterforce? What actions would send a message without crossing into open war? Those are the strategic questions being weighed right now. And while those calculations unfold at the highest levels of government, for most Americans, the immediate reality remains unchanged. Daily life continues. Cities remain operational. Infrastructure remains intact. And security agencies remain in prevention mode, not crisis mode. There is, however, one variable that always exists in moments like this, and it's the hardest one to quantify. Independent actors, individuals who may not be formally directed by any government but feel emotionally or ideologically compelled to act. History shows that geopolitical flashpoints can inspire people far removed from the original battlefield. Sometimes they overestimate their impact, sometimes they act recklessly, and sometimes they are intercepted long before anything materializes. But the unpredictability of human behavior is something no intelligence system can fully eliminate. That's why federal agencies widen monitoring not just internationally, but domestically during periods of heightened tension. They look for shifts in online rhetoric. They analyze communication spikes. They assess whether global events are being amplified in ways that could motivate isolated action. And in today's digital age, that amplification happens at incredible speed. A rumor can circle the country in minutes. A misleading headline can create panic before it's corrected. Social media, while powerful for information, can also distort scale, making isolated unrest appear widespread or transforming precautionary security measures into signs of imminent disaster. Separating signal from noise becomes essential. Elevated alert levels are not uncommon during major geopolitical shifts. In fact, historically, many of these alert periods pass without a single incident on U.S. soil. That doesn't mean the warnings were exaggerated. It means prevention worked. Increased patrols deter. Intelligence sharing disrupts planning. Cyber teams patch vulnerabilities before they're exploited. The absence of an event is often the result of invisible effort, and this is where perspective matters most. Fear tends to operate in absolutes. Either everything is fine or catastrophe is around the corner. But national security doesn't function in absolutes. It functions in probabilities and mitigation. Right now, probability assessments have shifted enough to justify vigilance, especially in major cities and digital infrastructure sectors. That's a far cry from saying an attack is inevitable. When you look at past periods of tension, whether with Iran, North Korea, Russia, or other adversaries, you'll see a pattern. Strong rhetoric, heightened alerts, strategic positioning, and then often a gradual stabilization once deterrence messages are exchanged and boundaries are understood. That pattern doesn't guarantee calm, but it reminds us that escalation is not automatic. There are off-ramps in international conflicts. There are back-channel communications the public never sees, and there are incentives on all sides to avoid uncontrollable consequences. Understanding that broader context helps shrink fear back down to scale. Because while uncertainty exists, so do safeguards. While risks are present, so are layered defenses. And while headlines amplify urgency, probability still matters. So where does that leave us right now? It leaves us in a moment of heightened vigilance, not hysteria. Officials are watching closely, major cities have increased patrol visibility, cybersecurity teams are reinforcing digital defenses, intelligence agencies are monitoring for asymmetric threats rather than conventional warfare, and experts remain clear on one central point. A direct missile strike from Iran to the U.S. mainland is not the realistic concern. The focus is on smaller scale, harder to detect possibilities. Lone actors, isolated incidents, or temporary cyber disruptions designed to create confusion rather than mass destruction. It's also important to remember that the United States has faced elevated threat environments before. After major geopolitical flashpoints, security posture increases, systems tighten, agencies coordinate, and in most cases, life continues without disruption because preparedness itself acts as a deterrent. The presence of more patrols in New York or Los Angeles doesn't mean something is scheduled to happen there. It means those cities are seen as high V-value hubs and precaution follows value. That's strategy, not panic. At the same time, confirmed casualties among U.S. service members ensure that this moment is being taken seriously at the highest levels. Strategic messaging from leadership is designed to discourage further escalation. Whether that messaging stabilizes the situation or intensifies rhetoric depends on decisions unfolding far beyond public view. And that uncertainty, the human element inside international power struggles, will always be the part no analyst can predict perfectly. For everyday Americans, the takeaway is steady awareness. Stay informed. Rely on credible updates. Practice basic digital caution. If you see something genuinely suspicious, report it through appropriate channels. But don't allow speculative worst-case scenarios to override probability and perspective. Heightened alert is a protective stance, not a countdown clock. As of today, cities remain operational. Infrastructure remains intact. No confirmed domestic attack has occurred tied to this escalation. Agencies are in prevention mode, and while tensions are real, so are the safeguards built over decades to respond to them. I'll continue monitoring developments and breaking them down clearly as new information emerges. In moments like this, clarity matters more than volume. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll navigate whatever comes next with facts, not fear.